They planned the party before the ink was even dry, and I let them. I knew every detail: the date, the venue, the guest list, the playlist, the three-tiered lemon cake Cordessa Vale had been planning to bake since the day her son Theodric brought me home, and she looked at me the way you look at a stain on a white tablecloth. I knew because Theodric's younger sister, Priya Nell, had been texting me screenshots for 6 weeks. Not out of loyalty, out of something messier than that. Something between guilt and obsession and the specific cowardice of a woman who wants to be good without paying the cost of it. But here's the part nobody saw coming, including me. I walked in anyway, dressed like a closing argument. Let me back up. My name is Zuri Asha Bontemps. I'm 23 years old. I'm from Decatur, Georgia. I graduated early from a school that didn't believe in me, and I married Theodric Vale when I was 21 because I thought love was supposed to feel like surviving something. I had learned that from my grandmother, Mireille, who said the sweetest fruits grew in the hardest soil. I misapplied that. I turned it into a permission slip for suffering. Theodric wasn't a bad man. That's the treacherous part. Bad men are easier. Theodric was a good man, with a family that had decided, somewhere in the architecture of their bloodline, that goodness was conditional, that it had a color, that it had a zip code and a tax bracket and a particular way of wearing your hair on a Sunday morning. His mother, Cordessa, had the kind of beauty that made cruelty elegant: pale taupe skin that photographs gold, cheekbones like Venetian bridges, a voice that descended rather than climbed when she made a cutting remark, so you never quite heard the knife going in. She called me Zuri, the way you pronounce a word in a language you've decided not to learn fluently, like it was always just slightly foreign in her mouth. His father, Whitmore Vale, barely registered as a person. He was the shadow that Cordessa's light made. He laughed when she laughed, frowned when she frowned, and had the specific blank-eyed warmth of a man who had traded his spine for domestic peace sometime in his mid-30s and never looked back. Then there was Aunt Beverly Corn, who was the family historian in the way that a surveillance camera is a historian. She cataloged everything: every slight, every fumble, every imperfect Thanksgiving. I once watched her store a comment I'd made about the gravy into some internal filing cabinet behind her eyes, and I thought, she will use that. And 3 Christmases later, she did. The marriage lasted 14 months. Theodric and I loved each other, and that love was real and alive and genuinely ours, and it still wasn't enough to survive the Vale infrastructure. There is a particular erosion that happens when the people around a marriage are committed to its failure. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's just a slow, patient sanding down of everything soft and private between two people until what was once warmth becomes a draft, and what was once intimacy becomes a performance you're too tired to keep giving. The end came on a Thursday. Not a significant Thursday. A Thursday with a grocery list and a pile of unopened mail, and Theodric saying in that low, tired voice of his that he thought maybe we had been a mistake. Not that he wanted a divorce, not that he was angry, just that we had been a mistake. And I sat with that word, mistake, until it became the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me in that house. Because I had been making myself smaller in that house for 14 months. I had been folding my personality like a piece of paper, again and again, until I was something flat and portable and easy to put in a drawer. So I said, okay, not because I didn't love him, but because loving someone and building a life with them are two different blueprints, and ours had never quite matched. The divorce was civil. Theodric was decent. We divided things without cruelty, signed papers without theater, and agreed to wish each other well in the quiet way that people do when they're grieving something that was also a relief. And then Priya Nell started sending me the screenshots. The first one was a group chat between Cordessa, Aunt Beverly Corn, 3 of Theodric's cousins, Malvere, Orson Kai, and a woman I'd met once named Deshonda Faye, who had always been the most loudly kind to me at family events, which should have told me something, and 2 of Cordessa's church friends, whose names I had been informed were Genevra and Loup Solange. The group was called, and I want you to sit with this, Finally. The messages in that group were not cruel in the way that tabloid cruelty is cruel. They were the other kind. The kind that happens in rooms where the target is not present, where the language softens into euphemism, where nobody says anything that could be taken as unambiguous evidence of malice. Cordessa wrote things like, "We can finally breathe." Beverly Korn wrote, "I prayed for this." Deshawnda Faye, the loudly kind one, wrote, "Theo deserves someone who fits." Someone who fits. I read that message at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, sitting on the floor of my new apartment, a place I had moved into 6 days prior, a one-bedroom in Kirkwood with high ceilings and a clawfoot tub and a kitchen window that faced a garden nobody maintained, but that still managed to bloom. And I felt something pass through me that I did not immediately have a name for. It wasn't anger, though anger was in it. It wasn't grief, though grief was there too. It was something older, something with roots in every time I had made myself quieter, more palatable, more digestible. Something Morel would have recognized immediately and named without hesitation. She would have called it reckoning. The second screenshot came 3 days later. Cordessa had booked a venue, a private room at Courts, which was an event space in Buckhead that charged $400 a plate and had a waiting list and a chandelier that cost more than my car. She had put down a deposit. She had ordered flowers, white tulips and eucalyptus, which had also been the flowers at our wedding, a detail so pointed it had to be intentional. She had arranged catering. The party was scheduled for the 22nd. My now finalized divorce had been signed on the 9th. 13 days. Priyanel sent me these screenshots with messages that oscillated between, "I'm so sorry," and "I thought you should know," and "Please don't tell anyone I told you," and once, memorably, "Do you think my mom is wrong?" As if I was her therapist. As if the correct response to being handed the blueprint for someone's humiliation of you was to then process that humiliation for the benefit of the humiliator's daughter. I want to be honest about something. There was a version of me, the folded paper version, who would have done exactly that, who would have absorbed it, who would have said, in a message threaded with the polite linguistic padding I had learned to use around these people, "It's okay, I understand, families need to process things in their own ways." But the reckoning had already started. I didn't respond to Priyanel's question. Instead, I called my best friend Tamsin Ray, who had been telling me to leave Theodric's family since approximately the 3rd week of my engagement, when Cordessa had referred to Tamsin Ray's locks as very authentic at a dinner party. Tamsin Ray picked up on the first ring, which is how I knew she had been waiting for me to reach whatever I had just reached. "They threw a party," I said. There was a pause. Then, "What are you going to do?" I told her. And she said, in the voice of a woman who had been sitting with this possibility for some time, "Wear the copper dress." The copper dress was a thing that had happened to me 3 months earlier at a sample sale in Little 5 Points. It was not the kind of dress you plan to own. It was the kind of dress that selects you. It was a deep, hammered-looking copper silk that caught light the way still water catches light, not by shining, but by holding it, by becoming it. It had a neckline that required confidence to navigate. It had a silhouette that required nothing except for you to be present inside it. I had bought it without occasion. I had hung it in my new apartment's closet and understood, without quite articulating it, that I was waiting for it to tell me when. The 22nd was a Wednesday. I took that day off work. I do contract data analysis for 3 small businesses, and I am my own calendar. And I spent the morning doing exactly what Morel had taught me to do before anything that mattered. I cleaned the apartment. Not for cleanliness, for clarity. I wiped down surfaces and scrubbed the tub and opened the kitchen window to the overgrown garden, and I thought about who I had been for 14 months and who I was now and how much distance there was between those 2 women. The distance was not as far as I'd feared. Mostly, I had just needed a room without the veils in it. I did my hair the way I do it when I am not managing anyone's comfort. Big, unbothered, natural. I put on the copper dress. I put on earrings that Morel had left me, small brass teardrops with a slight imperfection in the casting that made them look like they had been made specifically for a human hand, which they had, specifically hers. I put on shoes that I had bought during the marriage and never worn because they were too loud, too tall, too much like the person I was before I started folding. I called a car. I did not tell Theodric I was coming. I did not tell Priyanel. I turned my phone to silent and placed it face down in my bag and watched Atlanta slide past the windows and thought about my grandmother saying that the sweetest fruits grew in the hardest soil, and decided that what she had actually meant was not that you should plant yourself in hard soil. She had meant, even after all that difficulty, sweetness is still possible. I arrived at Celicourts at 8:17. The party had started at 7. I knew this because Priyanel had sent me the invitation, even the invitation, as though she was assembling some kind of evidence file, and I had read the start time carefully. I wanted them settled. I wanted them already inside whatever this was, already celebratory, already leaning into the story of their relief. I wanted to be the interruption. The woman at the front desk of Celicourts was young, professional, with the specific warmth of someone trained to produce it. She looked up when I came in, and I watched her take in the copper dress and arrive, visibly, at a conclusion about the evening she was having. "The veil party?" I said. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, enough for me to understand that she had been told something about the guest list. "Are you," she started. "Zuri Asha Bontemps Veil," I said, using the hyphen I had already filed to have removed. "I'm the guest of honor." I don't know where I found that sentence. I think it found me. She did not have a prepared response to it. She lifted the velvet rope. The private room at Celicourts was everything Priyanel's screenshots had suggested. White tulips, eucalyptus, the chandelier, $400 a plate food in small, beautiful portions on white dishes, a bar with a bartender who was almost certainly being paid as much as some of the guests earned in a week. There were maybe 30 people. I knew most of them. Some I knew well. Some I had cooked for. Some had held my hands at the wedding. The room registered me in waves. The first wave was the people nearest the door. 2 of Theodric's cousins, Orson Kai, and a woman named Phoebe Lark, whose presence I didn't remember being told about, and a man I didn't know who was holding a glass of something and laughing and then was not laughing. They went still. Not with guilt, not yet, but with the particular animal stillness of prey that has detected something and has not yet decided what to do with the detection. The second wave was the middle of the room, where Aunt Beverly Corn was telling a story that involved some enthusiastic gesturing. She stopped mid-gesture. Her hand stayed in the air for a moment. I will remember that suspended hand for the rest of my life. The third wave broke over Cordessa. She was standing at the far end of the room near the white tulips, wearing a dress the color of deep water, holding a glass of champagne at an angle that telegraphed ease. She had arranged herself in the room the way she arranged herself everywhere, architecturally, with an awareness of sightlines, with the specific confidence of a woman who had never doubted that she was the most important person present. She saw me, and the champagne glass moved. Not much, just a degree or two from its original angle, but I saw it. Theodric was not in the room. I had calculated for this. Theodric, who was decent and genuinely not cruel, who would be horrified by this gathering if he understood its full dimensions, was, I was almost certain, somewhere in the building, not knowing what his mother had named this party, not knowing about the finally group chat, not knowing about the white tulips. He would learn all of it, but not from me and not tonight. Tonight was not about Theodric. I walked into the center of the room. I want to describe the silence, but silence is actually the wrong word for it. It was more like a collective breath being held. It was the sound of 30 people recalibrating a story they had already started telling themselves, a story in which this room was an ending and not a beginning. I found the bar. The bartender, young, black, with the kind of neutrally professional face that is actually, if you look carefully, barely suppressed amusement, handed me a glass of sparkling water with lime without my asking. I would wonder later how he knew. Possibly he had been watching Cordessa's parties for long enough to know when an act of God was coming. Beverly Corn reached me first. She was the kind of woman who processed shock into motion rather than stillness. "Zuri Asha," she said, deploying both names like a weapon and then running out of weapon. "Beverly Corn," I said. "How did you—" she started. "I was invited," I said. I had not been invited. "But I want you to consider something. A party thrown in your name to mark an event in your life in a room that would not exist without you. Are you not, in some essential sense, the host?" She did not have a response. She orbited backward into the party like a satellite losing altitude. Cordessa came to me next, because of course she did. She had never been the kind of woman who sent others to do the difficult thing. Whatever her failures, and they were intricate and well developed and bore the marks of long cultivation, cowardice was not among them. She walked across the room in her deep water dress, and I watched her compose herself in real time, watched her find the version of herself that could handle this. She stopped 2 feet from me, close enough to be private, far enough to be architecturally considered. Zuri Asha, she said, and for the first time in 3 years, both names sounded complete in her mouth. Cordessa, I said, the tulips are beautiful. That landed. I watched it land, because she had chosen those tulips deliberately, to echo the wedding, to claim the symbol back, to place her preferred ending over the beginning, and I had named it gently in front of the room, without accusation, without theater, and somehow that was worse than anything theatrical would have been. She held it, I'll give her that. She held it without flinching, without retreating, without reaching for one of her elegant diminishments. You look extraordinary, she said finally, and I understood in that moment something about Cordessa Vale that I had been unable to hold clearly for 3 years through the distortion field of wanting her to love me. She was not incapable of seeing me. She had always been capable of seeing me. She had simply decided, for reasons that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the architecture of her own fears, not to. That understanding did not forgive anything, but it did close something. Thank you, I said. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. I set down the water glass. I turned. I walked back through the room, through the second wave and the first wave, and Orson Kai's still-stilled face, and Aunt Beverly Corn finding her orbit again, and I walked through the velvet rope and out into the Atlanta night, where the air smelled like the beginning of summer, and a car was already waiting because I had never, not for a single moment, planned to stay. I did not tell this story to hurt anyone. Theodric eventually learned about Finally. We talked about it once, on the phone, and he was quiet for a long time, and then he said he was sorry, and I believed him, because he was and had always been separate from what his family was. That distinction matters. I did not tell this story for closure either. Closure is something people say when they want an ending, and this isn't an ending. I still live in Kirkwood with the clawfoot tub and the wild garden. I still work my contracts. I still think about Murray's fruit metaphor and arrive at new readings of it. I told this story because there is something I needed the world to know, something I needed to say once, clearly, without apology, in my own voice and no one else's. 14 months of making yourself small does not unmake you. The paper remembers every fold, yes, but it also remembers its original size. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do, the thing no one sees coming, including yourself, is simply walk into a room that was designed to erase you and take up exactly as much space as you were always supposed to occupy. The copper dress is still in my closet. I will wear it again. I am already waiting for the next occasion that deserves it. And somewhere in Buckhead, in a room hung with white tulips, a chandelier held light the way still water holds light, and 30 people sat with a story that had just changed its ending, not because I forced it to, but because I showed up. That's all it took. That's all it ever takes. If this story moves something in you, hit that like button and subscribe. More truth coming every single week.